Welcome to our podcast. Today we will further be discussing if Twitter should be used in schools or if they should not be used in schools. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Janelle.
We are both teachers, so this was an interesting topic to both of us. The big question here is, should Twitter be used in schools or should they not be used in schools? Janelle, remind me, what do you teach again?
So I teach preschool, so my students are 4, so they won't be using social media at all.
Okay, right. And I'm a special education teacher, and my students are severely disabled, so they cannot access social media independently, but I do definitely see how Twitter and other social media platforms could be used as like an educational tool in a lot of other school settings. I also feel like I can find some benefits of how to use Twitter and other social media sites for parent engagement and such, things like that. So last week we read Using Twitter for Education, Beneficial or Simply a Waste of Time by Tang and Hugh. I was really compelled by the component of using Twitter specifically as an assessment tool in the classroom. They mentioned using it as a means for a formal assessment, and I thought that was interesting. I'm trying to think of new ways to check in with my students all the time, and I thought this may not be the best way personally for me to check in with my population of students, but I do think it'd be a great way to check in with students in like a middle or high school level, or students that are interested in social media and interested in Twitter.
Yeah, that was a great study that was done, and I agree. It's more for students who are in middle and high school, and I never thought about assessment components of using Twitter to be like something as like a formative assessment, and I don't know, I just never thought about using social media that way in schools.
Yeah, I was thinking at the end of a lesson, you could just kind of ask your students to like take out their devices or provide them with some type of classroom iPads. And then you can kind of just have them tweet something that they learned that day or something that they gained from that lesson. I feel like from there, teachers can show the tweets, on the smartboard, or they can review what the students had learned as a class. And I just feel like it's an interesting way for students to use Twitter because they're familiar with it and would probably like to use it in school.
Oh, I completely agree. There's also collaboration, which I think is a great way for students to learn how to work with their peers while using technology.
Right, I totally agree. And I feel like collaboration is such an important skill to learn, since it's like a lifelong skill that we use in everyday life. I think it's also important to remember that collaborating does not happen only in person, but virtually and through technology as well. I think we can both agree firsthand from transitioning to distance learning. I've seen how collaboration can still happen through many different online platforms. I Zoom with other teachers every morning, and we collaborate and plan lessons for the week. And I also created this like shared Google Sheet for my classroom staff and I, so my classroom aides and classroom assistant kind of work together through that form, and we collaborate and create work for each student. Have you had to collaborate a lot through this transition to working from home?
Yeah, we have been collaborating a lot, and especially with this whole new way of teaching students, it's new to a lot of people. And for my school, we follow a different philosophy. We follow the Reggio Emilia philosophy, so it's something that we don't use. We don't use technology. We use recyclable material, and we do a lot of exploring and discovering, but there's no technology whatsoever. So the way that the teachers and I have been communicating is similar to you. We use Zoom. So at least 3 times a week we get together, the whole entire school, all the teachers at least. We go ahead and collaborate that way, see how it's been going. But also, we also do teacher team meetings. So the other 4-year-old teachers, we get together and we talk about the lessons that we are going to be working on for each day. And this is something that has been working well so far. Meanwhile, we only started it like this week, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's been slowly going, but it's been great so far.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's a great plan for sure.
So there are some concerns that people have when using Twitter that they mention in the reading, for example, privacy, which I believe that's a pretty big concern. And I'm sure for most parents having, using social media. And there's also message length, which this was something new to me until I read the article. And Twitter being a big distraction, which I can completely relate to because Twitter, I mean, I don't really use it, but when I was younger, I used MySpace. That was popular, and that was a big distraction for me. I used to run home after school, go right onto my social media. And another thing was AOL Messenger. So that was another thing. And then when Facebook got popular, forget about it. That was also another big distraction for me.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I still feel to this day I have some trouble with being distracted by those sites. So I could definitely see that being an issue. As for the privacy thing, I also understand, and I think it would have to be, if it was used in an educational setting, that the teacher or the school would have to get, granted permission that they were allowed to use those sites, or, if they weren't, then they weren't participating in that component. So that definitely could be an underlying issue. I do feel that, though, if it's used for an educational purpose, it would be less distracting per se and maybe a little bit more motivating. If students are looking at Twitter regardless because they're distracted, they might, scroll past something that ended up being educational or pertaining to their class and they saw an announcement. So I feel like it could grab students' attention and make them more engaged if they were able, to use a desired social media site and not get in trouble for it. So I do see both sides.
Yeah, I think that when using social media when you're in school, I think it's going to definitely help motivate the students to want to learn more, and it'll help them be engaged a lot more. And now that I'm thinking about it, using Twitter can be a great way to teach students digital citizenship, which was part of the draft for the New York State K-12 computer science and digital fluency learning standards that we learned about towards the beginning of the semester. And the standards can be incorporated into lessons and help teach students learn how to be safe while using the internet. And this is going to help students understand how to navigate through the internet. And there are things that, there's an example actually that was pretty good that I thought was listed on the standards, and that's knowing right from wrong, like the rules of etiquette, and with using social media, you have to have some online etiquette, which I think, students have to understand that.
Definitely, you're totally right, and I think those standards are so important, especially as we grow and evolve over time, because technology will really just continue to be a driving force in education and in life in general. And as for, these standards addressing, safetiness for the students and etiquette, they're so important because students really could get themselves into a great amount of trouble or in a difficult situation if they don't know those rules. So I agree. I think those standards are very important.
Yeah. I also remember that you mentioned communication on our voice thread. The communication with the teachers and students, I think, is really important as well. An example of an activity that Tang and Hugh mentioned in the study is the instructor sends one post every morning with additional materials. Is that something that you do with your students?
I thought that part of Tang and Hugh was really interesting also. I don't do that personally, but I have recommended that to certain teachers in our teacher meeting today, because I think some students in my school could begin to do this or understand this. Little background, my school is broken up into 3 areas. So BLC is where I teach, and those students are severely delayed cognitively and developmentally. Samoset is the section that has students that are severely medically fragile and physically impaired. But lastly, we have a section called TSP, and it's basically a transition program that teaches students with mild autism and mild disabilities to help transition them into work sites with job coaches. So I can see Twitter being beneficial for them since they do communicate socially with their peers and adults, and they definitely could utilize Twitter as a means of communicating and gaining resources from their teachers and keeping track of assignments and due dates. Personally, I don't communicate through something like that, but I do communicate with my parents through an app called Remind. It allows you to send like reminders to parents that goes to an app on their phone, and I can remind them of upcoming events or other important information. For right now, I've been sending out a message on Remind just saying, hi, just sent an email, please check it, have a great week. I'm actually thinking about maybe starting a Twitter page though, and having parents follow it, because I could post my reminders on there, and it also allows for a conversation amongst parents that Remind does not. So I feel like if I had a Twitter page, maybe called Miss Shannon's Twitter page, I could post the reminders there. Parents can, like and share that they got it and saw it, and then maybe communicate with other parents on the similar needs or questions that they have. What are your thoughts on that? Do you communicate with parents through anything like that?
Something similar. I don't use Remind, but I've heard of Remind before, and I think that's a great way to communicate with parents because, you're not using email, because email, it takes not everyone checks their email right away, but, if you get a notification through an app, the parents can instantly see it. So the way that I communicate with my parents is I use Brightwheel, and using Brightwheel, we post pictures on there of their child daily, and then we also send out reminders and alerts if we're having a fire drill. We notify parents that way. But I'm using that right now, as well as using my Google Classroom to communicate with parents. And when they do have a question, for instance, today I recorded a video for my students of me reading a story, and I had found out later on that they couldn't hear me while I was reading the story, so I had to re-record, but it was a great way for the parents to tell me right away that they couldn't hear me. So that was one thing that I really did appreciate about how technology is today. It's like quick and instant, and you can just get information, you can get notified from the parents quickly.
I totally agree. I think that convenience of something being quick is definitely necessary in this day and age, so I'm definitely on board with you with that. Just another interesting reading from this week was Social Media and Education, Reconceptualizing the Boundaries of Formal and Informal Learning by Greenhow and Lewin. They bring up a lot of great points, but they specifically mention that the use of social media in schools is often teacher-directed, and I definitely could see that. Although I do feel teachers play a role in facilitating the social media platform if they were to use it in their class, obviously, I do think it could be used as like a type of discussion board activity if some students were able to access it and use it. I just feel like students can like this, and they could share another student's posts, and they can respond and kind of communicate that way. But I do feel like predominantly it most likely would be teacher-directed. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's only teacher-directed?
I would have to agree with you. I feel like most of the time it's teacher-directed, and we don't want that. We want our students to engage with their peers and also with their teacher. So the fact that you mentioned that they can communicate in a way of liking and sharing, students' posts, that's a great way. And, that's similar to what we do now with our Twitter accounts with our class. And I see our peers retweeting whatever post they like, and whenever someone has a podcast, they retweet that as well. And of course, we like the posts that we see from our peers, and so I think that's a really great way to communicate. So I think, when there isn't so much technology used, I feel like it's a little more teacher-directed, unless you have like Class Dojo. I believe Nia actually had brought that up, and that I think is a great tool to use because you can have students be engaged that way, and have it right on the board, and you can ask your students to go up to the board and use Class Dojo as well.
Right, I totally agree, and I think the biggest takeaway that both of us, if I could speak for both of us, is that, technology is so hugely important right now. I think we all had to learn that firsthand. And though maybe Twitter is not the best tool for us to use with our populations, I do think, like you're saying, Class Dojo, the other platform that you used, Remind, those are all similar ways to try to help and communicate with students in the best way possible for right now, especially. And I definitely could see the benefits of Twitter being motivating for certain students in the classroom, and trying to reach students by, all right, pay attention, because at the end of the class you can use your phone to tweet for our final activity. So like I said, I don't see it being exactly perfect for my situation, for where I teach, and maybe for where you teach also, but I definitely could see the benefits of it.
I completely agree, definitely.
All right, well, this has been a great talk. I always enjoy talking to you because we have a similar type of job where you're teaching students very young, and I'm teaching students who function at pretty much the age range that you teach. So it's always interesting to talk with you and share our thoughts.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Of course. Talk to you soon.
Bye.